Kanye West has been mocked by South Park more than once. It started with a joke about fish sticks. Kanye got roasted for missing the punchline, laughed it off, and the internet moved on. Just another cartoon poking at a celebrity ego. But line up every appearance after that one, year by year, and it stops looking like comedy. This is South Park versus Kanye West. Two parallel origin stories. Chicago 1996 to Colorado 1997. Two young men more than 1,000 miles apart were both trying to break into worlds that did not want them yet. Neither one had a plan that made much sense on paper. Neither one had the backing of a big company. Both of them were about to spend years grinding through rejection before anyone outside their small circle of friends took them seriously. This is where the story of South Park and Kanye West actually begins, long before either name meant anything to the public. In Chicago in 1996, a 19-year-old named Kanye Omari West was just starting to get paid for something he had been doing for fun since he was a kid. West was born on June 8, 1977, in Atlanta, Georgia, but his parents split up when he was 3 years old and he moved with his mother to Chicago. He grew up in a middle-class household there and started rapping as early as the 3rd grade. By the time he was a teenager, he had gotten deep into the local hip-hop scene, learning how to build beats using sampled records the same way plenty of Chicago producers before him had done. He studied under a local producer named No ID, who taught him how to chop up old vinyl records and turn short pieces of them into new songs. West leaned especially hard into speeding up vocal samples pulled from classic soul records, a technique that would later become something people recognized instantly as his sound. West did not come from money, and he did not have an easy path into the music business. He attended art school for a short time before dropping out completely to chase music full-time, a decision his mother reportedly struggled with since she worked as a college professor and clearly valued education. But West had already made up his mind. He wanted to produce and eventually rap, and college was not going to get him there any faster. His first real break came in 1996 when a Chicago rapper named Grav picked several of his beats for a debut album called Down to Earth. West was 19 years old at the time, and this was his first official production credit, meaning the first time his name showed up on a record that a company actually pressed and sold. He ended up producing 8 tracks on that album and even rapped a short verse on one of the songs himself. The album itself did not sell in huge numbers and never turned Grav into a major star, but for West it mattered for a different reason. It proved his beats were good enough that someone would pay for them and put his name on a real release. From there, West kept working, mostly behind the scenes. In 1998, he became the first producer signed to a management company called Hip Hop since 1978, which was run by 2 men named G. Roberson and Kayambo Joshua, who went by the nickname Hip Hop. Around the same time, West also worked as a ghost producer for a producer named Derek Angeletti, who went by D-Dot. Ghost producing means making a beat for someone else without getting public credit for it, which was common in the industry at the time, but obviously frustrating for someone trying to build a name for himself. Because of his connection to D-Dot, West was not able to release music under his own name during this stretch, so instead, he put together a small group with some friends from Chicago. The group was called the Go-Getters and included West along with 3 other local rappers named GLC, Timmy G, and Aerostar. In 1999, they released their only album together called World Record Holders through a small label West had started himself called Conman Productions. It did not make much noise outside of Chicago, but it kept West working and kept him sharpening his skills as both a producer and a rapper. The moment that actually got him noticed outside of his hometown came at the very end of the decade. In January of 1999, a rapper named Foxy Brown released her second studio album called China Doll. Brown had already built a name for herself with her 1996 debut album Il Na Na, and with her appearance on a group project called The Firm alongside Nas and a few other well-known East Coast rappers. For her second album, Brown decided to take control as her own executive producer, meaning she had a direct say in every decision made on the record, including who produced which songs. She brought together a group of different producers for the project, including D-Dot, Irv Gotti, Swizz Beatz, and a 21-year-old Kanye West, who produced one track on the album called My Life. China Doll turned out to be a big deal. When it came out on January 26, 1999, it debuted at the very top of the Billboard 200 chart, which tracks the best-selling albums in the country each week. This made Foxy Brown only the second female rapper in history to have an album debut at number 1, following Lauryn Hill's massive success with The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill just a year earlier. The album eventually sold over 1 million copies and was certified platinum within a few months of release. For West, having his name attached to a chart-topping album, even for just one song, was a real signal that people in the industry needed to start paying attention to him. Even with that success, West still faced a wall that had nothing to do with his talent. This was the height of an era in rap defined by a very specific look and attitude. Artists like Jay-Z, Nas, Cameron, and 50 Cent were dominating the charts, and the image that came with that dominance was built around baggy clothes, heavy jewelry, and backgrounds that often involved real struggles with poverty, crime, or the streets. West did not fit that mold at all. He grew up middle class, he liked preppy clothes with collared shirts, and he had never sold drugs or lived the kind of life that so much of the rap at the time was built around describing. He would later say in interviews that record executives held this against him directly, telling him flat out that his image simply was not marketable for the genre. That word, marketable, became something West would end up fighting against for years. First as a producer trying to convince people he could also be an artist, and later as an artist trying to convince people his ideas were worth backing at all. While West was grinding through the Chicago and New York music scenes trying to prove himself, a completely different kind of creative partnership was forming 1,000 miles away in Colorado. In 1992, two film students named Trey Parker and Matt Stone met each other at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Parker was studying music and Stone was studying math, which might seem like an odd pairing for two people who would go on to build one of the most successful comedy franchises in television history, but the two quickly discovered they shared the exact same sense of humor. According to Parker, the two of them spent a full year just making each other laugh by doing silly voices and playing around with the idea of childlike characters before they ever put anything on film. That year of joking around eventually turned into something real. Using nothing more than construction paper, glue, and a very old 8mm camera, Parker and Stone made a short animated film that they called The Spirit of Christmas, which later became better known by the nickname Jesus vs. Frosty. The plot was simple and strange in the way a lot of student film comedy tends to be. A group of 4 boys build a snowman and bring it to life using a magic hat, only for the snowman to turn violent and start attacking people, eventually leading to a fight between the snowman and Jesus himself. The short premiered at a student film screening in December of 1992 and was a hit with the crowd, even though neither Parker nor Stone thought much of it beyond that moment. In fact, according to later interviews, they had forgotten to even put their names on the finished video, so for a while, people who saw it did not know who had actually made it. After finishing school, Parker and Stone moved to Los Angeles the way a lot of young filmmakers do, hoping to break into the industry. Their first major project together was a feature-length film called Cannibal the Musical, a comedic take on a real historical story about a Colorado man convicted of cannibalism in the 1800s. The film did not get picked up by a major distributor, eventually finding a home with a smaller company called Troma Entertainment, but it did something more important for their careers. It caught the attention of a Fox television executive named Brian Graydon, who saw potential in the pair's strange sense of humor, even if the film itself was not a commercial hit. In 1995, Graydon reached out to Parker and Stone with an unusual request. He wanted them to make a short animated video that he could send out as a Christmas card to friends in the entertainment industry. He paid them $2,000 for the job. The result was a sequel of sorts to their earlier student film, this time called Jesus vs. Santa, which brought back the same rough animation style and the same crude sense of humor, but introduced a cast of characters that would eventually become the basis for South Park. Graydon finished the video and sent it out to around 80 of his friends as planned, thinking that would be the end of it. It was not the end of it. Something about the short caught on in a way nobody involved had expected. People who received the video started copying it and passing it along to friends. And since this was still years before anyone could easily upload and share video online, the copies spread the old-fashioned way, from one VHS tape to another. Each copy tended to be a little worse in quality than the last, which somehow only added to its underground appeal. By the time it had made its way around Hollywood and beyond, The Spirit of Christmas had become one of the most widely copied and shared pieces of media of the early internet era, even though almost none of that sharing happened through the internet itself in the way people think of it today. With that kind of buzz building around the short, Parker and Stone started trying to turn the characters and setting into a full television series. The first network they approached was Fox, which made sense given that Brian Graydon worked there and had already helped launch the project once before. But the pitch meetings did not go smoothly. Fox executives had concerns about how crude and rude the show would be, worried about how audiences and advertisers would react to foul-mouthed grade school kids saying things that grade school kids were not supposed to say on television. The final sticking point, according to later accounts from the people involved, came down to one specific character. The show included a piece of talking excrement, an idea that eventually became the character Mr. Hanky, and Fox simply was not willing to put something like that on the air. The network passed on the show entirely. This left Parker and Stone with a project that had already built a strange kind of underground fame, but no home to actually air on. The short film had done exactly what Graydon hoped it would do in terms of getting attention, yet the very qualities that made it stand out, the crude humor and willingness to offend, were the same qualities keeping traditional networks away from it. It is worth remembering that television censorship rules in the mid-1990s were far stricter than what people are used to today, and a show built entirely around pushing past those lines was always going to be a hard sell to a company like Fox that answered to a wide range of advertisers and standards departments. By the end of 1996 and moving into 1997, both of these stories had reached a similar kind of standstill. Kanye West had real production credits and one appearance on a chart-topping album, but he still could not convince record labels that he belonged on stage as a rapper rather than behind the scenes as a producer. Trey Parker and Matt Stone had a viral hit on their hands and a fully formed idea for a television show, but the biggest network in the country had already told them no. Neither project fit neatly into what the industry considered safe or sellable at the time. Neither one had money or power behind it. All they had was talent, stubbornness, and the sense that what they were building was worth fighting for, even if nobody else could see it yet. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What neither of them knew in that moment was how differently their two stories were about to unfold. One project was about to get a second chance from a much smaller and much hungrier company willing to take a real risk. The other was about to need a stroke of luck involving a hospital bed, a wired shut jaw, and a decision to keep recording anyway. Two completely different paths moving toward two completely different kinds of success, without either side having any idea that one day, more than a decade later, their worlds would crash into each other over 4 words about a fish stick. Section 2. South Park's Risky Bet. Comedy Central, August 1997. Fox had already said no. That much was settled. Trey Parker and Matt Stone had a short film that people could not stop passing around, but the biggest network willing to look at it had turned the whole idea down because of one character who happened to be a walking piece of poop. For most creators, that kind of rejection from a major network would have been the end of the road. Instead, it turned into an opening for a much smaller, much less established company to step in and take a chance nobody else wanted to take. That company was Comedy Central. In the mid-1990s, Comedy Central was nowhere near the household name it is today. It was a young cable channel still trying to figure out its own identity, without a signature hit show to point to, and without the kind of budget that networks like Fox or NBC had access to. The man who led the channel through this period was Doug Herzog, an executive whose background gave him a very particular set of instincts for spotting unconventional talent. Herzog had gotten his start in television in the early 1980s, working first at CNN and then as a segment producer for Entertainment Tonight before joining MTV in 1984, right as that channel was still figuring out how to grow beyond simply playing music videos back to back. During his years at MTV, Herzog helped develop and launch The Real World, one of the earliest reality television shows in American history, a project that required convincing skeptical executives that ordinary young people living together in a house could actually hold a television audience's attention without any scripted plot at all. That willingness to bet on something unusual, something that did not fit the existing mold of what a hit show was supposed to look like, followed Herzog directly into his next job. In 1995, Herzog was named president of Comedy Central. One of his first priorities upon taking the role involved figuring out what kind of daily programming could give viewers a consistent reason to tune into the channel every single day, rather than only checking in occasionally for stand-up specials or reruns. This thinking led directly to the creation of The Daily Show, which premiered under Herzog's leadership in 1996, a year before South Park would even get its first episode on the air. Having already pushed one unconventional idea through the network's approval process and watched it succeed, Herzog was in a strong position to recognize potential in another. When he saw The Spirit of Christmas, the crude, homemade-looking short film that Parker and Stone had put together, Herzog reportedly considered it one of the funniest things he had ever come across. Where Fox saw a liability, something too crude and too risky for a channel that answered to a much wider range of advertisers, Herzog appeared to see an opportunity. A cartoon this rude and this strange did not fit anywhere on a traditional broadcast network, but a smaller cable channel with far less to lose, and an executive with a personal track record of betting on odd, boundary-pushing ideas, had much more room to gamble on something unusual. Even with Herzog's interest, Comedy Central did not jump straight into ordering a full season. The network first commissioned a pilot episode, which became Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, centered on Cartman getting abducted by aliens along with a subplot involving playing Kyle's baby brother. Because Parker and Stone did not yet have a real contract locked in and were working with very little money, they animated this first episode using cutout paper shapes moved by hand, the same basic method used in the original short films that got them noticed in the first place. It remains the only episode in the show's entire history made almost completely without computer animation. The pilot did not test well at all. When Comedy Central showed it to test audiences ahead of release, the reactions were rough, with executive Brian Graydon later describing it as one of the worst focus group results he had ever witnessed in his career. Critics who reviewed the episode after it aired were similarly unimpressed, focusing heavily on how crude the language and content felt, and comparing it unfavorably to more established animated shows of the time, such as The Simpsons. Parker later admitted that he and Stone had felt pressure going into the pilot to match the shock value of their earlier short films, and in trying to live up to that reputation, they may have pushed the crude content further than the show actually needed. Given how badly the test screenings went, Comedy Central executives were genuinely unsure whether the show was worth continuing. Graydon reportedly hoped the premiere might pull in around 200,000 viewers when it finally aired on August 13th, 1997, which would have been a modest but acceptable start for a new cable series. What actually happened blew past that expectation. The episode ended up drawing a Nielsen rating of 1.3, translating to somewhere close to 900,000 households tuning in, several times higher than what the network had braced for. For a brand new, low-budget cartoon airing on a channel most people were not checking on a regular basis, this was a genuinely strong opening number, even if nobody quite realized yet how much bigger the show was about to get. Because of the uncertainty surrounding the pilot, Comedy Central did not commit to a full season right away. Instead, the network ordered a short initial run of just 6 episodes, a cautious first step that let them see how the show performed before spending more money on it. This was a smart way to limit financial risk on a project nobody was fully sure would hold an audience past its first episode. Parker and Stone used those 6 episodes to settle into a rhythm that felt more natural than the shock-heavy pilot, focusing more on mocking specific topics and ideas rather than simply piling on crude language for its own sake. Episodes during this stretch covered subjects ranging from a visiting celebrity subplot involving Kathy Lee Gifford to a volcanic eruption interrupting a camping trip to an episode about a dog exploring its sexuality that ties into a school football game. None of these ideas required much money to animate, but they gave the show room to build actual jokes and stories instead of relying purely on being offensive. Word about the new show spread in a way that looked completely different from how television normally found its audience. This was still years before social media existed in any form people would recognize today, and even basic internet use was far less common in American households than it would become within just a few years. Without any of the sharing tools people rely on now, South Park built its early audience the old-fashioned way, through people telling other people to watch it. College campuses in particular became hotspots for group viewing, with students gathering together each week the same way earlier generations might have gathered around a favorite Saturday morning cartoon. This kind of organic, word-of-mouth growth is much slower than a viral clip spreading online, but it also tends to build a much more loyal core audience, since the people watching are actively choosing to seek the show out rather than simply stumbling across a clip by accident. That loyal audience kept growing episode by episode. Comedy Central's decision to hold back on ordering a full season quickly looked like unnecessary caution once the ratings numbers started coming in. By the time the show reached its 6th episode, the last one included in that original small order, the audience had grown enough that ordering more episodes was an easy call. Comedy Central expanded the order by 7 additional episodes, bringing season 1 up to a full 13 episodes total, a season that would run all the way from August of 1997 through February of the following year. The growth did not stop there either. As the season moved forward, the show kept climbing in the ratings, culminating in its 10th episode called Damien, which pulled in a Nielsen rating of 6.4, nearly 5 times higher than where the show had started with its premiere. To put that number in context, a rating that high was considered enormous for a cable program airing in this era, especially one airing on a channel that had never had anything close to this level of audience interest before. South Park had gone from a show executives were unsure deserved a second batch of episodes to being, by a wide margin, the most successful program Comedy Central had ever aired. This kind of rapid growth changed how people inside the television industry viewed the entire cable channel. Comedy Central had spent years being seen as a niche network built mostly around stand-up specials and reruns of older comedy programs. South Park gave it something completely different, a genuinely original hit that people were actively seeking out and talking about in a way that competed with programming on much bigger networks. The show picked up award recognition almost immediately as well, earning an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Animated Program and an Annie Award nomination in its very first season, along with a GLAAD Award for one of its episodes centered on a character named Big Gay Al. For a show that critics had dismissed as crude and shallow just months earlier, this kind of recognition from award groups showed that there was more substance underneath the shock value than people had initially given it credit for. While all of this was unfolding in Colorado and at Comedy Central's offices, Kanye West's own path toward recognition was still moving at a much slower pace, without anywhere near this kind of dramatic turnaround. By 2001, West had built a reputation in the music industry as one of the most in-demand young producers working, largely thanks to his contributions to Jay-Z's album The Blueprint, released on September 11th, 2001. West produced 4 of the album's 13 tracks, working out of Baseline Studios in New York City alongside fellow producer Just Blaze during recording sessions that took place earlier that same year. Among the songs West produced was Izzo, released as the album's lead single in the summer of 2001 and built around a sample of a Jackson 5 record, which climbed to number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became Jay-Z's first solo song to crack the chart's top 10 as a lead artist. West also produced Heart of the City, a track built around a soaring, sample-heavy beat that many critics later pointed to as one of the album's strongest moments, along with the more aggressive song Takeover, which contained pointed lyrics aimed at rival rappers Nas and Prodigy and became one of the most talked about tracks on the record for reasons that had little to do with West's production and everything to do with the feud it helped fuel. The Blueprint ended up being both a critical and commercial success, widely regarded in the years since as one of the strongest albums of Jay-Z's career and one of the most influential hip-hop records of its decade. Critics and industry figures singled out the album's production as a major part of what set it apart from Jay-Z's earlier work, with its heavy reliance on chopped-up soul samples marking a clear departure from the more radio-friendly sound of his previous albums. This success helped revive interest in Jay-Z's career at a moment when some in the industry felt his output was growing repetitive, while also turning both West and Just Blaze into 2 of the most sought-after producers in the entire genre almost overnight. West's production work on that album put his name in front of far more people in the industry than his earlier work with Foxy Brown or the smaller Chicago acts he had produced years before, and industry writers looking back on the album years later would specifically credit its success with launching West toward the opportunity to eventually release his own material as a rapper, rather than remaining behind the scenes indefinitely. Despite this growing reputation as a producer, West still could not convince anyone to take him seriously as an artist in his own right. According to later interviews and documentary footage, West would walk into the offices of Rockefeller Records, the label Jay-Z co-founded, and play demo tracks for staff members hoping someone would take notice. Reports from people who witnessed these moments describe an uncomfortable silence following his pitches, with staff largely unmoved by the idea of West stepping out from behind the boards and onto the microphone himself. Jay-Z himself later admitted that people around the label questioned whether West fit the image associated with Rockefeller's other major artists, whose backgrounds and styles leaned heavily into the tougher, street-oriented persona that dominated mainstream rap at the time. It eventually took a mix of persistence and practical business concerns to get West signed. Rockefeller co-founder Damon Dash, who ran the label alongside Jay-Z, made the decision to sign West as a recording artist in 2002, according to multiple accounts from people connected to the label. Some reporting on the deal suggests part of the motivation was not full confidence in West as a future star, but rather a desire to keep him from taking his talents to a rival label, given how valuable his production skills had already proven to be, particularly after the success he had just helped deliver on The Blueprint. Whatever the exact mix of reasons behind it, the deal gave West something he had been chasing for years, an actual contract as an artist, rather than just a hired hand working behind other people's records. The moment of West officially becoming a Rockefeller artist was later captured in documentary footage that would surface years afterward, showing Dash removing his own diamond-studded chain and placing it around West's neck at a concert, a symbolic gesture marking his entry into the label's roster alongside artists like Jay-Z, Cameron, and Beanie Siegel. It was a moment that looked, on the surface, like the beginning of a smooth and rapid rise. In reality, West still had an album's worth of music left to make, still had doubters inside his own label, and still needed something to actually launch his career as a rapper in the public eye, rather than just on paper. Comparing these two situations side by side reveals two very different kinds of risk. Comedy Central took a financial and reputational gamble on a show that tested badly and offended almost everyone who saw an early version of it, backed by an executive with a personal history of betting on unconventional ideas, and that gamble paid paid off within a matter of months through nothing more complicated than word of mouth and repeat viewership. West's situation involved a different kind of risk, one built around convincing an entire industry to reconsider what a successful rapper could sound like and look like. An industry that had already made up its mind about what worked and was in no hurry to change its opinion just because one talented producer, fresh off helping deliver one of the most acclaimed albums of the year, wanted a shot at the microphone himself. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. South Park had already proven its doubters wrong by the end of its first season, turning a show nearly killed by bad test screenings into the biggest hit in its network's history. West's story had not reached that turning point yet. He had a record deal, but a record deal alone does not guarantee an audience, a hit song, or any kind of cultural impact. Getting signed was only the beginning of a much longer fight, and the event that would actually push West into the spotlight was still more than a year away, arriving in a form nobody, including West himself, could have planned for or expected. Section 3. Through the Wire. At around 3 in the morning on October 23, 2002, Kanye West was driving home from a recording session in Los Angeles. He had spent the night working on tracks for other artists, including Beanie Sigel and the Black Eyed Peas, the kind of long, exhausting studio hours that had become normal for him as he tried to build a career as both a producer and a future rapper. Worn out from the session, West fell asleep behind the wheel of his rented car. The vehicle crashed head-on into another car in West Hollywood. West survived, but the crash left him seriously hurt, with his nose fractured and his jaw broken into 3 separate pieces. The driver of the other car suffered broken legs in the same accident. Paramedics rushed West to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, a hospital in Los Angeles that had also treated other well-known figures in music over the years. Doctors performed emergency surgery on his jaw, inserting a metal plate to hold the broken bones together and wiring his mouth shut so it could heal properly. According to reports from the time, his jaw was expected to remain wired for around 6 weeks, a long and uncomfortable recovery process that would have kept most people away from any kind of demanding physical or vocal work. West remained in the hospital for roughly 2 weeks following the surgery before being released to continue his recovery outside a clinical setting. For a rapper still trying to prove he deserved a real shot in the music industry, an injury like this could have been devastating. West did not yet have a debut album out. He had built his reputation almost entirely as a producer, someone who worked behind the scenes making beats for other artists, and had only recently signed as a recording artist himself with Rockefeller Records, having finalized that deal just about 2 weeks before the crash took place. A serious injury that kept him out of the studio and away from live shows for weeks or months at a critical early stage in his career carried real risk of stalling his momentum before it had even properly started. Instead of waiting out his recovery quietly, West did something that surprised even people close to him. According to friend and fellow rapper Consequence, West called him within just a few days of the crash already rapping verses out loud, despite barely being able to move his mouth. Consequence has said he was confused and even a little alarmed hearing West trying to work on music so soon after such a serious accident, but West could not be talked out of it. Roughly 2 weeks after the crash, still recovering and with his jaw still wired shut, West went into the Record Plant Studios in Hollywood and recorded his verses for a new song. He built the track around a sped-up sample of a song called Through the Fire, originally recorded in 1984 by the singer Chaka Khan for her album I Feel For You, and gave his new song a title that directly referenced what he had just been through, calling it Through the Wire. The sample itself became a small point of tension between West and Khan years after the song's release, even though it played a central role in the track's success. According to Cootie Simmons, one of the directors who worked on the song's eventual music video, Khan was initially hesitant to allow the sample to be cleared for use, and the approval only came through after Khan's own son heard the finished video and encouraged her to say yes. Khan spoke warmly about the song for years afterward, at one point describing West as clever and adorable for the way he had reworked her original vocal. Her feelings shifted somewhat by 2019, when she told interviewers she felt uneasy about how dramatically West had sped up her voice on the finished track, saying nobody had told her in advance that her vocal would be pitched up to nearly 3 times its normal speed, giving it the higher pitched sound that became closely associated with West's early production style. Years later still, Khan described letting go of any lingering frustration over the sample, saying she had come to better understand how reworking and altering existing recordings functions as a normal part of hip-hop production, rather than something aimed at disrespecting the original artist. Listening to the finished recording, it is possible to hear the physical strain in West's voice, since he was rapping with his jaw still held together by wire and unable to fully open his mouth mouth the way a rapper normally would. Rather than trying to hide that strain, West leaned into it, turning the injury itself into part of the song's identity. The lyrics describe details from the crash and his recovery directly, including a reference to Cedars-Sinai as the same hospital where the rapper Notorious B.I.G. had died years earlier after being shot. For an artist trying to introduce himself to a wider audience for the first time, choosing to open with a song built entirely around near-death honesty was an unusual and risky move, especially in a genre where image and confidence usually came first. Through the Wire first appeared publicly on a mixtape called Get Well Soon, which West released on December 14th, 2002, only about 7 weeks after the crash itself. The mixtape's title referenced his recovery directly, and the response to the song was strong enough that Rockefeller decided to move forward with releasing it as an actual single. Through the Wire came out properly as a single on September 30th, 2003, becoming the very first official single of West's solo career and the lead single for his upcoming debut album. When it reached its commercial peak, the song climbed to number 15 on the Billboard Hot 100, a respectable showing for a debut single from an artist still largely unknown to the wider public outside of his production work, and it eventually earned platinum certification in the United States, along with a gold certification in the United Kingdom. The music video that went along with the single matched the raw, personal feeling of the song itself. Rather than filming a polished, expensive production with dancers or elaborate sets, the video used real photographs and video clips taken during the crash's aftermath and West's recovery process, essentially turning his own medical ordeal into visual storytelling. According to co-director Cootie Simmons, the idea for the video came directly from West's own mind and came together very quickly, almost overnight. Simmons later explained that if the concept had been written up as a formal pitch and shown to executives ahead of time, it likely would have been rejected since it broke so completely from what a typical rap video looked like at that point. The safer, more expected choice for a debut single video in that era usually involved images of parties, expensive cars, and glamorous surroundings. West's actual jaw, wired shut in real hospital photos, was about as far from that formula as a debut single video could get. Simmons, who worked alongside West closely during this early period of his career, would go on nearly 2 decades later to co-direct a multi-part documentary chronicling West's rise, drawing on years of personal footage he had shot of West going back to well before the crash itself. While recovering and continuing to write new material, West faced an additional setback. Months before his debut album was scheduled for release, the unfinished record leaked online, meaning fans and industry insiders could hear an incomplete version of the project before West or his label had planned to release it. For most artists, a leak at this stage would represent a serious financial and creative blow, undercutting months of planning around a proper rollout. West responded by treating the leak as an opportunity rather than a disaster. He pushed back the album's actual release date and used the extra time to remix and remaster the material, adding new verses, bringing in gospel choirs, and improving the production quality across multiple tracks. The result was a more polished and more ambitious record than what had leaked months earlier, built around themes that were unusually personal and wide-ranging for a mainstream rap album at the time, touching on religion, consumer culture, family, education, and his own insecurities. West's debut album, titled The College Dropout, finally arrived on February 10th, 2004. That release date happened to fall on exactly the same day as Norah Jones's second album, Feels Like Home, which turned out to be one of the biggest selling records of that entire year. Jones's album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 chart, selling just over 1 million copies in its first week alone, an enormous number that made it nearly impossible for any other release that week to claim the top spot. The College Dropout debuted directly behind it at number 2, a strong showing for a rookie artist going up against one of the best opening sales weeks of the year from an already established star. Despite not claiming the top chart position in its debut week, The College Dropout went on to become one of the most successful and influential debut albums of its era, eventually selling well over 3 million copies in the United States and earning West recognition as Billboard's top new artist of 2004. The album's critical reception matched its commercial success. Critics praised West's unusual approach to subject matter, noting how his lyrics avoided the typical rap album focus on wealth, violence, or street life in favor of more personal and sometimes vulnerable topics, including his own doubts about whether he would succeed at all. One of the album's later singles, Jesus Walks, stood out in particular for openly discussing faith and religion in a way that was rare for a mainstream rap song at the time, and it went on to become one of the most acclaimed songs of West's career. Another single from the album, Slow Jams, featuring fellow Chicago rapper Twista alongside actor and singer Jamie Foxx, climbed all the way to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, becoming West's first chart-topping single as a credited lead artist, even though Through the Wire is the song most closely tied to the story of his physical recovery. The scale of the album's success became fully clear at the 47th Annual Grammy Awards, held on February 13th, 2005, at the Staples Center in Los Angeles. West walked into that ceremony with 10 total nominations, the most of any artist that year, including a nomination for Album of the Year alongside his work on The College Dropout. By the end of the night, he had won 3 awards, taking home Best Rap Album for The College Dropout itself, Best Rap Song for Jesus Walks, and Best Rap or Sung collaboration for the song Slow Jams, which featured Twista and Fox. West also performed Jesus Walks live at the ceremony, marking his first appearance on the Grammy stage as a nominated artist, rather than simply as a background producer. Through the Wire itself received its own nomination that night for Best Rap Solo Performance, though it lost in that category to Jay-Z's song 99 Problems, meaning the very song that had launched West's public career as a rapper came up just short on the one night that celebrated his debut album's biggest wins. Looking back at the full sequence of events, from the crash in October of 2002 to the Grammy wins in February of 2005, West's rise reads almost like a story too dramatic to be real. Yet every piece of it is well documented through hospital records, chart data, interviews, and award show archives. A near-fatal accident that could have ended his career before it truly started instead became the exact material he used to launch it, turning personal pain into one of the most talked about debut singles of the decade and setting up an album that reshaped what mainstream rap could sound like. None of this happened by accident or luck alone. West made a deliberate choice, while still recovering from a serious injury, to keep working rather than wait for a safer moment. He made another deliberate choice to build his introduction to the public around honesty about his own struggles, rather than projecting an image of effortless success. Both choices ran directly against the norms of the industry he was trying to break into, an industry that had already told him for years that his background and his personality did not fit what a successful rapper was supposed to look like. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. By early 2005, Kanye West had answered that criticism about as thoroughly as anyone could ask. He had a platinum-selling debut album, 3 Grammy Awards, and a growing reputation as one of the most original new voices in music. What nobody could have predicted at that point was how West's confidence, the same self-belief that had pushed him through years of rejection and then through a broken jaw, would eventually become the exact trait that a group of writers more than 1,000 miles away would decide to build an entire joke around years later, without West ever seeing it coming. Section 4. On to bigger and longer things. By the end of South Park's first season, the show had already gone from a shaky experiment nobody expected to survive its first episode into the most successful thing Comedy Central had ever put on the air. With that kind of runaway success behind them, Trey Parker and Matt Stone found themselves with an opportunity that almost no television creators get this early in a show's life. Their little cartoon about 4 foul-mouthed kids in a Colorado mountain town was about to become a full-length movie playing in theaters across the country, less than 2 years after its very first episode aired on cable. The film that resulted was called South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, and it reached theaters on June 30th, 1999, following a premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theater in Los Angeles a week earlier. Paramount Pictures handled its release in the United States and Canada, while Warner Brothers distributed it in other countries. Getting a movie made this quickly after a show's debut was already unusual, but the path Parker and Stone took to actually finish the film ended up being just as unusual as the timeline itself. Reporting from the time indicates that Paramount's executives were genuinely uneasy about how far Parker and Stone wanted to push the film's rating, at one point going so far as to prepare internal graphs projecting how much additional revenue a PG-13 version of the movie might generate compared to an R-rated one. The talent agency representing Parker and Stone, William Morris, pushed back against this pressure and advocated for the filmmakers to be allowed to make the R-rated film they actually wanted to make, arguing that watering down the content to chase a wider audience would undercut the entire appeal of bringing South Park to theaters in the first place. Parker and Stone ultimately won that argument, retaining creative control over just how far the film could go in terms of language and content. Before the movie could reach any theater, it needed a rating from the group that decides what audiences are allowed to see a film, called the Motion Picture Association, often referred to by its older name, the MPAA. According to accounts from Parker and Stone themselves, they originally wanted to title the film South Park: All Hell Breaks Loose, but were told the word hell could not appear in the title of an animated film without pushing the rating higher than they wanted. In response, the two came up with a replacement title that sounded innocent on its surface, but carried an obvious second meaning underneath it, calling the movie South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut instead. According to Parker, the ratings board approved this new title without objecting to what it was actually implying. The title turned out to be one of the smaller battles Parker and Stone had to fight to get the film released the way they wanted. The movie was submitted to the ratings board a total of 6 times, and 5 of those 6 submissions came back with an NC-17 rating, the most restrictive rating a mainstream film can receive, short of being banned from release entirely. An NC-17 rating would have seriously limited where the film could be shown and advertised, since many theater chains and media outlets refused to carry NC-17 content. The 6th and final submission, made only about 2 weeks before the film's scheduled release date, still came back with an NC-17 label attached. According to reporting at the time, a marketing representative from Paramount then contacted Parker and Stone directly, explaining that the studio needed the film to carry an R rating instead. Stone responded by reaching out to producer Scott Rudin, who in turn contacted a Paramount executive and reportedly reacted strongly to the situation. The following day, the film's rating was lowered to R, with the movie's content left completely intact rather than being cut down further. Parker later spoke about the frustration of dealing with the ratings board throughout this process, telling reporters that the group appeared to focus almost entirely on specific words and phrases rather than looking at the film's content as a whole in any consistent way. This tension between the filmmakers and the ratings board became such a central part of the production that it worked its way directly into the finished movie itself, since the plot of Bigger, Longer, and Uncut revolves heavily around censorship, war, and how quickly public panic can spiral out of control over something as small as a swear word. One line from the film, delivered by the character Sheila Broflovsky, directly pokes fun at the ratings board's priorities, joking about how graphic violence tends to pass through without much resistance, while curse words trigger far more concern. Part of what makes the ratings fight so notable is a specific detail confirmed by multiple sources involved in the film's production. The finished version of Bigger, Longer, and Uncut contains 399 individual curse words throughout its runtime. This number was not an accident. At the time, any film submitted with 400 or more curse words was automatically pushed into the NC-17 category regardless of context. So Parker and Stone kept their swearing count just one word below that threshold, packing in as much profanity as the rules technically allowed without crossing the line that would have doomed the film's rating from the very start. This detail alone shows how closely the two men were tracking the specific rules they were fighting against, treating the rating system almost like a puzzle to be solved, rather than a simple obstacle to accept. Beyond the fight with the ratings board, the film carried an unusually large amount of ambition for a project based on a low-budget cable cartoon. Rather than simply stretching out a normal episode's plot to feature length, Parker and Stone built the movie as a full musical, complete with 12 original songs written by Parker alongside composer Mark Shaman, who also scored the film. This decision reflected a genuine love of musical theater on Parker's part, something that would later become even more obvious through his and Stone's work creating the Broadway show The Book of Mormon many years afterward. The film's songs range from big, sweeping numbers that spoof the style of classic Disney movies to a villain song performed by Satan himself, all wrapped inside a plot about the boys of South Park sneaking into an R-rated movie starring their favorite Canadian cartoon characters Terrence and Phillip, which sets off a chain of events involving censorship, a declared war against Canada, and an unlikely romantic relationship between Satan and the real-world dictator Saddam Hussein. The film's cast reflected the bigger budget and higher ambitions of the project as well. Alongside Parker and Stone, who voiced most of the show's regular male characters just as they did on television, and Isaac Hayes, who returned as the character Chef, the movie brought in several outside actors for supporting roles, including George Clooney, Eric Idle, Mike Judge, Minnie Driver, Dave Foley, and Brent Spiner. Nearly every female character in both the television show and the film during this period, including Sheila Broflovsky, Sharon Marsh, Leanne Cartman, and Carol McCormick, was voiced by a single performer named Mary Kay Bergman, whose range across so many distinct characters made her one of the most essential and least publicly recognized parts of the show's creative team. Making a movie of this size required real money, and the numbers involved show just how much confidence the studio was putting behind Parker and Stone at this point. The film was produced on a budget of $21 million, a serious investment for a project spun out of a crude cable cartoon that had only been airing for about 2 years. That investment paid off. Bigger, Longer, and Uncut went on to earn $83.1 million at the box office worldwide, making it at the time the highest-grossing animated film to carry an R rating in movie history, a record it would hold for well over a decade before eventually being surpassed. Critics responded well to the finished film too, praising its writing, its music, and the way it managed to be both genuinely funny and surprisingly sharp in its satire of censorship and public panic. Just months after the film's theatrical release, the production was struck by real tragedy. On November 11, 1999, Mary Kay Bergman died by suicide at the age of 38. Given how central her voice work had been to nearly every female character across the show's early seasons and the film itself, her death was a profound loss for Parker and Stone personally, who had considered her a close friend rather than simply a colleague. Around this same period, Parker publicly acknowledged in an interview just how difficult it would be to fill the gap Bergman's absence left behind, remarking that it would likely take several different performers working together to replace the range of characters she alone had handled up to that point. The film's most unexpected achievement came from one specific song, and that achievement became tangled up directly with the loss of Bergman in the months that followed. Blame Canada, the big ensemble number in which the parents of South Park decide to place all responsibility for their children's bad behavior onto their northern neighbor rather than looking at themselves, received the nomination for Best Original Song at the Academy Awards, with the nomination formally credited to Parker and composer Mark Shaman. Bergman had originally sung lead vocals on the song's studio recording as the character Sheila Broflovsky, making her a natural candidate to perform the number live if the film's team were invited to the ceremony. With her death coming just months before the Oscars took place, that plan was no longer possible. At the 72nd Academy Awards, held in the year 2000, comedian and actor Robin Williams stepped in to perform Blame Canada on stage in Bergman's place, a move that Parker and Stone's circle understood as a kind of tribute to their late friend and collaborator. The performance became one of the most talked about moments of that year's ceremony, staged as a full theatrical number, complete with dancers dressed as Canadian Mounties and a crowd of extras dressed in South Park-style clothing holding protest signs. The lead-up to the performance involved its own small skirmish with censorship, fittingly enough for a song from a movie built around exactly that theme. According to reporting on the event, the television network broadcasting the ceremony asked that the song's lyrics be altered to remove certain words before Williams could perform it live on air, a request that Shaman pointed out was more than a little ironic, given that the entire film the song came from was about censorship in the first place. Rather than rewriting the lyrics, Williams performed the number with a strip of tape placed over his own mouth, turning away from the audience whenever the original, uncensored words would have been sung, letting the joke about censorship play out live on stage in front of millions of viewers. Parker and Stone attended the ceremony themselves that night as well, choosing to show up dressed in women's formal gowns as a kind of joke about the seriousness of the event, a stunt that generated its own share of media coverage at the time. It was later revealed, through a documentary covering South Park's production process, that the two had also taken LSD both before and during the ceremony, adding an extra layer of chaos to an evening that already included a censored performance and a tribute to a friend who had passed away only a few months earlier. Despite all of this buildup, Blame Canada did not win the award that night, losing instead to Phil Collins' song You'll Be in My Heart, written for the Disney film Tarzan. Parker and Stone did not let the loss go without comment, writing a subsequent episode of South Park that mocked Collins directly, portraying him as a villain who carries his Oscar statuette everywhere he goes throughout the episode, only for the trophy to end up painfully lodged in an uncomfortable place by the story's end. For a movie built around crude jokes, musical numbers about Satan, and a swear word count carefully engineered to dodge an NC-17 rating, earning recognition from the same industry group that hands out Oscars for prestige dramas was a genuinely strange and notable moment. The song did not win the award, but simply being nominated, and simply having a performer of Robin Williams' stature step in to honor a friend who never got the chance to perform it herself, gave the film a level of mainstream respectability and emotional weight that nobody watching the crude cutout paper cartoon back in 1997 could have predicted. While all of this success and recognition was happening around the film itself, the actual television series was going through one of the more difficult stretches of its long run. Making a feature-length movie on top of continuing to produce new episodes of The Weekly Show put enormous pressure on Parker and Stone, who were already used to writing, animating, and finishing each new episode within about a single week's time. Season 3 of the show aired its first half of episodes while the two men were simultaneously working on finishing the film, splitting their attention between two massive projects at once. This kind of overlapping workload showed in the finished product. Parker and Stone have both spoken publicly, in interviews and DVD commentary tracks recorded years later, about how little they think of the show's earliest seasons. Parker has said in interviews that he finds the show's first 3 seasons embarrassing to watch back, going as far as saying he would delete basically everything made before season 4 if he had the option. Stone has echoed similar feelings, specifically pointing to season 2 as a particularly weak stretch, a period during which the two had also delegated more of the writing responsibilities to outside staff writers rather than handling every episode themselves, a decision they later regretted and moved away from once season 3 began. Looking at this stretch of South Park's history as a whole, a clear pattern emerges. The show earned an opportunity that most new television programs never come close to getting, turning into a fully fledged, award-recognized feature film in less time than most shows spend finding their footing at all, one whose legacy would end up carrying real emotional weight tied to the loss of one of the show's own creative team members. At the same time, chasing that opportunity came with a real cost, stretching 2 creators paper thin across 2 demanding projects and leaving behind a stretch of television that even its own creators consider some of their weakest work. Success, tragedy, and strain all arrived tangled together within the exact same 18-month period. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Success and strain had arrived together, tangled up in the same 18 months. But South Park kept going, eventually becoming one of the longest-running shows on American television. Somewhere in the years ahead, one half-hour episode was still waiting to be written, an episode that would end up mattering to a specific outside celebrity far more than anyone making the show could have guessed. Section 5. Fish Sticks airs April 8th, 2009. By the time April of 2009 arrived, South Park had long since moved past the shaky, overworked stretch of its early years. The show was now in its 13th season, running on a fast turnaround schedule where each new episode got written, animated, and finished within about a week of airing. This kind of speed let Trey Parker and Matt Stone react to current events almost as quickly as they happened, something that had become one of the show's biggest strengths over the years. On April 8th, 2009, the 5th episode of that 13th season aired on Comedy Central, carrying the simple title, Fish Sticks. Nobody watching that night could have guessed how much that half hour would end up shaping one specific celebrity's public image for years afterward. The episode was written by Parker along with Bill Hader, a cast member of Saturday Night Live who occasionally contributed to South Park scripts during this period. The story begins with Eric Cartman spending an afternoon at the home of his classmate Jimmy Valmer, a character who works as a stand-up comedian within the show. Jimmy is trying to come up with new material for an upcoming comedy routine, while Cartman sits nearby eating chips and shooting down every single joke Jimmy pitches. Frustrated with Cartman's constant criticism and looking for something to offer him besides fruit, Jimmy suggests that Cartman check the freezer for fish sticks. Something about the phrase sparks an idea in Jimmy's head. He quickly puts together a simple joke built around how similar the words fish sticks sound to a much cruder phrase when said out loud, ending with the punchline asking whether someone enjoys putting fish sticks in their mouth, then labeling them a gay fish based on that answer. Cartman finds the joke funny enough to laugh at immediately, and from there the episode tracks how quickly a simple, silly joke can spread once people start repeating it. By the next day at school, the joke has already made its way through the entire student body, then through the school staff, and eventually through the parents of South Park as well. Once the joke is spread widely enough, late-night television hosts begin repeating it on their own shows, treating it as fresh material even though it has already been picked apart by every kid in South Park's elementary school days earlier. As the joke spreads, the episode shifts its focus toward a separate but connected conflict, this time centered on who actually deserves credit for coming up with it in the first place. Cartman begins telling people that both he and Jimmy created the joke together, despite having done nothing more than sit in the room while Jimmy figured it out on his own. Kyle repeatedly tries to point out that Cartman had no real role in writing the joke, but Cartman's version of events keeps shifting and growing more elaborate every time he retells the story, eventually including invented details that make him sound like an equal creative partner rather than someone who simply happened to be present. This structure lets the episode poke fun at how personal ego can quietly rewrite someone's own memory of events, showing Cartman's flashbacks becoming more exaggerated and less accurate each time he brings the story up again. While Cartman and Jimmy work through this credit dispute, the episode introduces a real-world comedian named Carlos Mencia into the plot, using him as a stand-in for the broader idea of comedians who have a reputation for taking credit for jokes and material that were not originally their own. Within the show's story, Mencia claims the fish sticks joke as his own creation during a television appearance, presenting it to a wide audience as something he came up with himself. himself. This claim eventually draws the attention of a character based on the real rapper Kanye West, who by this point in the episode has become completely fixated on the joke for a very different reason than everyone else in South Park. Throughout the episode, Kanye is shown becoming increasingly obsessed with a single question, unable to understand why so many people are laughing at him specifically in connection with a joke about being a gay fish. He brings in a doctor at one point to physically confirm that he does not have gills, treating the joke as a literal accusation rather than the wordplay it actually is. No matter how many times people around him try to explain that the joke has nothing serious behind it, Kanye cannot let it go, convinced there must be a deeper meaning buried inside it that everyone else understands except for him. This inability to simply laugh something off and move on becomes the core comedic engine driving the rest of the episode's plot. Believing that Carlos Mencia is the true author of the joke that has made his life so difficult, the character based on Kanye tracks Mencia down along with a group of hired men. Mencia admits during this confrontation that he only claimed the joke because he struggles to come up with original material of his own, but this admission does nothing to calm Kanye down. The episode shows Kanye and his group violently attacking Mencia with baseball bats, ending with a killing that the show plays for shock and dark comedy rather than any kind of realistic consequence, a style of exaggerated violence that had become a familiar part of South Park's storytelling toolkit by this point in the series. With Mencia removed from the picture, Kanye eventually learns through a television appearance that Cartman and Jimmy have been publicly taking credit for creating the joke themselves, the same claim that earlier caused friction between the two of them privately. This sends Kanye and his group to South Park itself, where they track down Jimmy and Cartman and tie them up, demanding answers about who actually deserves the blame for a joke that has completely taken over his public image. As Cartman and Jimmy continue arguing with each other even while tied up together, Cartman suddenly stumbles into a realization about how a person's own ego can become so large that it becomes impossible for them to accept the truth about who they really are. This realization, delivered by Cartman about his own behavior throughout the episode, ends up landing directly on Kanye instead. Hearing this idea spoken out loud finally seems to break through to him, and Kanye undergoes a sudden and complete shift in how he understands the joke that has been tormenting him throughout the episode. Rather than continuing to fight against being labeled a gay fish, Kanye accepts the label entirely, embracing the idea and deciding to leave his old life behind to live as a fish in the ocean instead. The episode closes out this transformation with a musical sequence, presenting a full song called Gay Fish, built as a direct parody of the sound and style of West's real-world hit single, Heartless, which had been released only a few months earlier in late 2008. The show even used auto-tune, the vocal effect closely associated with the real Heartless, to make the parody land as closely as possible to its target. Understanding why Parker and Stone landed on Kanye West specifically as the target of this joke requires looking at how the writing process actually unfolded behind the scenes. According to Wikipedia's account of the episode's production, the original inspiration for the joke had nothing to do with Kanye at all, tracing back instead to the daredevil performer Evel Knievel. It was only after coming up with the initial idea that Parker and Stone began thinking through which real celebrity would react to the joke in the funniest and most fitting way, eventually landing on West because they believed he would take the whole thing far too seriously and completely fail to see any humor in it. This decision connects directly to a real music video West had released the year before, in which he humorously portrayed himself attempting a stunt similar to one of Knievel's famous jumps, giving the writers a natural bridge between the Knievel-inspired joke and West as its eventual target. Even after settling on the idea, Parker and Stone reportedly sat on the concept for a long stretch of time before actually turning it into a finished script. According to comments Stone made about the episode's development, the joke initially seemed almost too simple and too dumb to justify building an entire half-hour episode around, leading the two of them to hold off on writing it for a while before finally deciding to move forward. The decision to include Carlos Mencia in the story came about later still, described by Stone as something closer to an afterthought that emerged naturally while the writers worked through the rest of the script, rather than being part of the original concept from the very beginning. When Fish Sticks finally aired, it performed well by the standards of Comedy Central programming at the time, drawing a Nielsen rating that translated to more than 3.1 million households tuning in for its original broadcast, making it the most watched Comedy Central production of that particular week. The episode also earned a spot on the show's DVD and Blu-ray release when the full 13th season came out on physical media the following year, in March of 2010. At the time it first aired, nothing about those numbers suggested the episode would end up standing out as anything more than a solid, well-liked direct entry in a long-running series that had already built a reputation for skewering celebrities without much concern for how those celebrities might feel about it. What made Fish Sticks different from so many of the show's other celebrity-focused episodes came down entirely to what happened outside the world of the show itself, months after the episode had already aired and mostly faded from casual conversation. The joke at the center of the episode, built around a simple play on words that Jimmy Valmer stumbles into almost by accident, was designed from the start to work whether or not the audience knew anything about Kanye West personally. Removing West from the story would have still left behind a functional episode about ego and misplaced credit, the same theme South Park had explored plenty of times before, using entirely different characters and situations. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Keeping West attached to the joke, however, created something the show's writers could not have fully controlled once the episode left their hands. A real public figure was now permanently associated, at least in the minds of a large television audience, with a punchline about being a gay fish, whether he found the whole thing funny or not. Cartoon characters do not carry real-world reputations that can be damaged by an unflattering joke, but real celebrities absolutely do, and West was about to prove, through his own public reaction over the following months, exactly how much that kind of joke could stick to a person once it was out in the world. Section 6. He really didn't get it. Fish Sticks aired without any warning to Kanye West about what was coming, and the way he responded to it in the days right afterward surprised almost everyone who had a hand in making the episode. Rather than lashing out publicly or ignoring the episode completely, West posted a reaction on his own blog the following day, on April 9th, 2009. Writing in all capital letters, a habit he was known for on his blog at the time, West admitted the episode had gotten to him, saying that South Park had murdered him the night before, and adding that it was pretty funny even though it hurt his feelings. He went on to reflect on his own personality in a way that lined up closely with exactly what the episode had just mocked him for, saying he had genuinely been working on his ego and recognizing that the confident, boastful persona that had helped him during his early struggling years no longer served him the same way now that he had already found success. This response caught Trey Parker and Matt Stone off guard. According to later accounts, both creators were surprised by how humble and self-aware West's reaction turned out to be, especially since their portrayal of him in the episode had painted him as someone completely unable to accept criticism or laugh at himself. Parker and Stone reportedly felt their treatment of West in the episode had actually been gentler than their treatment of Carlos Mencia, who the episode depicted being violently killed. Yet West still took the joke seriously enough to write a lengthy public reflection about his own behavior. Media outlets covering the story at the time described West's reaction as unexpectedly good-natured, a tone that did not match the reputation he had already built for himself as someone quick to react strongly to criticism. For a few months after that blog post, it looked like the entire situation might quietly fade into the background, remembered mainly as one more entry in South Park's long list of celebrity parodies rather than anything more significant. That changed completely on September 13th, 2009, at the MTV Video Music Awards, held that year at Radio City Music Hall in New York City. West had received 4 nominations of his own that night, though none of them ended up winning. During the early part of the show, 18-year-old Taylor Swift won the award for Best Female Video for her song You Belong With Me, beating out several more established artists including Beyonce, whose video for Single Ladies had been considered one of the frontrunners in that category. As Swift began her acceptance speech, thanking the audience and expressing surprise at winning, West walked on stage, took the microphone from her hands, and interrupted her in front of the live audience and television cameras to argue that Beyonce's video deserved the award instead. The moment left Swift visibly stunned, and the audience audibly reacting with boos directed at West. Cameras captured Beyonce looking shocked as her name was invoked in a moment she had no part in creating. West was removed from the venue for the remainder of the show following the incident. Later that same night, when Beyonce won the show's top award for Video of the Year, she brought Swift back on stage during her own acceptance speech, giving her the chance to finish what West had interrupted earlier. The public reaction was immediate and enormous. Within hours, the incident had become one of the most talked about pieces of entertainment news of the entire year, with numerous celebrities publicly criticizing West's behavior across social media and interviews. Pop singer Pink posted a message on social media describing West in harshly negative terms, while singer Katy Perry directed a message at West on the same platform comparing his actions to cruelty toward a small animal. Terms related to the incident became some of the most searched and discussed topics online that night, an unusually large reaction even by the standards of a live awards show where unscripted moments tend to generate headlines. The controversy grew even larger the following day when it reached all the way to the White House. President Barack Obama, taping an interview with a CNBC reporter ahead of the formal recording, was overheard commenting on West's behavior at the VMA, as the night before, referring to him using a blunt insult. Because CNBC and the network ABC shared a technical line at the time to save costs, several ABC News employees were able to hear the exchange even though it was never meant to be broadcast. Before ABC's own editorial process had finished reviewing the material, at least 3 of its employees posted the president's comment on the social media platform Twitter, spreading the remark publicly within minutes. ABC quickly apologized to both the White House and CNBC for the mistake, acknowledging that the comment had been made off the record and should never have been shared. Years later, when a reporter asked Obama directly whether he still felt that way about West, the former president confirmed the label had been accurate, while also adding that he considered West talented. West, for his part, responded to Obama's comment at the time with noticeably more restraint than he had shown at the VMAs themselves, telling one publication that the president had far more important things to worry about than his own reputation. West responded to the wider backlash quickly as well. The following day, September 14th, he posted an apology on his blog and also appeared as a guest on the debut episode of The Jay Leno Show, where he had originally been scheduled to perform alongside Jay-Z and Rihanna. Instead of only performing, West sat down with Leno to address what had happened the night before. During the interview, West described the incident as rude and explained that he understood almost immediately after handing the microphone back to Swift that he had made a serious mistake. When Leno asked what West's mother would have thought about the situation, referencing her death from surgery complications back in 2007, West grew visibly emotional and struggled to answer, eventually admitting he felt ashamed that his own pain had ended up causing pain for someone else. He told Leno he intended to apologize to Swift directly and said he planned to take time away from his public career to reflect on his behavior. Looking at these two moments together, the Fish Sticks blog post from April and the VMA apology from September creates a strange kind of pattern. In April, West had written publicly about actively working on his ego and recognizing that his old habits no longer fit who he wanted to be. Just 5 months later, he found himself apologizing on national television for one of the most talked about ego-driven outbursts of his entire career, delivered in front of a live audience watching an award show. The very trait South Park had built an entire episode around mocking him for, an inability to step back and let a moment belong to someone else, played out again on a much bigger stage than a cartoon episode ever could, this time with real emotional consequences for a teenage singer and lasting damage to West's own public image. The relationship between West and Swift did not end there, and its later chapters add an unusual amount of context to how West's original apology actually held up over time. 6 years after the incident, at the 2015 MTV Video Music Awards, Swift agreed to present West with the show's Michael Jackson Video Vanguard Award, a Lifetime Achievement style honor. In her introduction, Swift deliberately echoed the exact wording West had used to interrupt her years earlier, reworking it into a compliment about his career, a moment widely interpreted at the time as a public and symbolic act of forgiveness between the two of them. Swift later revealed in an interview that West had personally called to ask her to present the award, and that she had happily agreed and prepared a heartfelt speech for the occasion. According to Swift's own account, the warmth of that moment was undercut almost immediately once she reached the stage, when West used part of his own acceptance speech to suggest that the only reason MTV had chosen her specifically to present his award was to boost the show's ratings. Swift has said this comment, made in front of a live audience only moments after her generous introduction, left her feeling that West had one version of himself in private and a very different version once he stepped in front of a crowd. West reportedly sent a large arrangement of flowers to apologize for the remark afterward, and Swift chose to move past the incident rather than let it reopen the earlier conflict. That fragile peace did not last much longer. In early 2016, West released a song called Famous, which included a lyric referencing Swift in a way she found deeply upsetting, particularly given that she said she had not been given any advance warning about how the line would portray her. West and his camp maintained that Swift had been informed ahead of time and had even approved the reference, a disagreement over what exactly had been discussed that would go on to fuel further public conflict between the two camps for years afterward. Whatever the full truth of that particular disagreement, the reignited feud made clear that the reconciliation staged so visibly at the 2015 VMAs had never fully settled the underlying tension between West's public and private behavior towards Swift, tension that traced all the way back to the same instinct South Park had had first mocked in Fish Sticks, an inability to simply let someone else have their moment without inserting himself into it. West's feelings about the Fish Sticks episode itself also turned out to be more complicated over time than his original blog post suggested. In late 2010, West released his 5th studio album, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, widely considered one of the strongest records of his career. One of the songs on that album, a track called Gorgeous, includes a line where West describes a violent act directed at a South Park writer using a fish stick, a direct and pointed reference back to the episode from the year before. The line has been cited by critics and fans repeatedly since the album's release as one of the more memorable moments on the record, and it shows a noticeably sharper edge than the reflective, self-critical tone West struck in his original blog response back in April of 2009. Whatever peace West had made publicly with the joke in the days right after it aired, something about it clearly continued to sit with him well over a year later. South Park itself moved on from West fairly quickly after Fish Sticks aired, returning to its usual pace of tackling new celebrities and current events on a weekly basis. West, for his part, spent the next several years rebuilding his public image following the VMA incident, releasing new music and stepping back from the kind of unscripted public appearances that had gotten him into trouble. For a while, it looked as though South Park's fish stick joke and West's outburst against Taylor Swift might remain two separate chapters of his public story, connected mainly by unfortunate timing rather than anything deeper. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That would not stay true for long. Years later, once West's life had moved through several more highly publicized chapters, both involving his engagement to a new partner and eventually a very different kind of controversy entirely, South Park would find its way back to him one more time, using a completely different comedic approach that reflected just how much had changed since a cartoon Kanye first insisted he was not, in fact, a gay fish. Section 7. 21st Century Schizoid Man. For several years after the Taylor Swift incident at the 2009 VMAs, Kanye West mostly worked to rebuild his public image, releasing critically praised albums and staying largely away from the kind of unscripted controversy that had defined his reputation earlier in his career. That period of relative stability did not last forever. Starting around the middle of the 2000s, West's public life began shifting in ways that were harder to laugh off than an award show interruption, eventually touching on his health, his politics, his business relationships, and finally his own words about one of history's most horrifying figures. The first clear signs of this shift became visible in 2016. Early that year, West posted a series of messages on social media claiming he was $53 million in debt, a statement that surprised many people given how successful his career had appeared from the outside. The claim came just ahead of the release of his 7th studio album, The Life of Pablo, alongside a new clothing line he had been developing. Later that same year, during a concert on his St. Pablo tour, West abruptly stopped performing partway through the show and delivered a long, unstructured speech to the crowd rather than continuing with his set list. Shortly after that concert, he was admitted to a hospital in Los Angeles, where he remained for more than 10 days. Reports from the time described the hospitalization as connected to hallucinations and paranoia, attributed at the time to a combination of exhaustion and sleep deprivation, and the remaining dates on his tour were canceled as a result. According to later reporting, West was diagnosed with bipolar disorder during this same period in 2016, though he did not share this diagnosis with the public right away. He eventually spoke openly about it in 2018, the same year he released an album simply titled Ye, whose cover art directly referenced living with bipolar disorder. That same year, he also revealed that he had struggled with an addiction to opioid medication following a liposuction procedure. Over the years that followed, West's public statements about his own mental health shifted more than once, at times affirming the bipolar diagnosis and at other points describing it as incorrect, including a claim he made directly to Donald Trump that the diagnosis had been a misdiagnosis. In early 2025, West stated in a podcast interview that a new doctor, one he said his wife encouraged him to see, had told him his symptoms were more consistent with autism than with bipolar disorder. None of these claims about his own diagnosis have been independently confirmed through any released medical records, and West's own account of what doctors have told him has changed more than once over the years, making it difficult for outside observers to know with certainty what, if anything, has been formally diagnosed at any given point. Alongside these disclosures about his health, West's public life became increasingly tied to political statements starting around 2018. In April of that year, he began publicly expressing support for Donald Trump on social media, at one point posting a photograph of himself wearing a red hat associated with Trump's political campaign. That October, he visited the White House and met met with Trump in person inside the Oval Office, an appearance that generated significant media coverage given West's history of celebrity status rather than direct political involvement. During that same visit, West delivered a lengthy, largely unscripted speech in front of reporters and cameras, touching on a wide range of topics including his own mental health and his feelings about masculinity in modern culture. In 2020, West announced that he intended to run for president of the United States himself, launching a short campaign under a party he founded called the Birthday Party. He ultimately appeared on the ballot in a small number of states and received a very small share of the overall popular vote nationally, well under 1%. Even after that campaign ended, West continued expressing interest in future political runs, later stating an intention to seek the presidency again in 2024. In 2021, West legally changed his name from Kanye Omari West to the single name Ye, a change that was reflected afterward in most media coverage of him going forward. It was during the back half of 2022 that West's public statements took a turn that drew a much sharper and more universal wave of condemnation than anything in his earlier career. In early October, West appeared at his own Yeezy fashion show during Paris Fashion Week, wearing a black shirt printed with the phrase "White Lives Matter" across the back, alongside an image of the late Pope John Paul II on the front. Several models in the same show wore versions of the same shirt. The phrase has been formally categorized by groups such as the Anti-Defamation League as a hate slogan, one historically associated with white supremacist organizations responding directly to the Black Lives Matter movement. The appearance drew immediate and widespread criticism from commentators, fashion industry figures, and members of the public, with many describing the choice as needlessly provocative given the phrase's well-documented history. Later that same month, West posted a message on social media referencing violence against Jewish people, using language that combined a military phrase with a direct threat. The post was removed from the platform shortly after it went up, but not before it had already been seen and shared widely, and it resulted in West's account being temporarily restricted. In the weeks that followed, West made a series of additional public statements repeating similar ideas across multiple interviews and podcast appearances, drawing criticism from a wide range of public figures, organizations, and eventually government officials. The business consequences of this stretch arrived quickly and added up to one of the steepest financial falls ever recorded for a public figure of West's size. Gap ended its clothing partnership with him in September of 2022. Balenciaga, the French fashion house where West had modeled just weeks earlier, cut ties with him on October 21st. Adidas, the company behind West's hugely profitable Yeezy sneaker line, followed on October 25th, ending a partnership that Forbes had estimated was worth around $1.5 billion of West's overall net worth on its own. Talent agency CAA dropped him as a client around the same time, and a documentary film about his life that had already been completed was shelved by its production company rather than released. Because so much of West's reported wealth depended on the ongoing royalty stream from the Adidas partnership, Forbes formally removed him from its list of the world's billionaires that same week, estimating his remaining net worth at around $400 million, made up mostly of real estate, cash, his music catalog, and a small ownership stake in a shapewear company founded by his ex-wife. This pattern of statements and business fallout reached a particularly widely covered moment on December 1st, 2022, when West appeared on the InfoWars program hosted by Alex Jones, a broadcaster known for promoting conspiracy theories. West appeared for the interview with his face fully covered by a black mask, seated alongside Nick Fuentes, a figure publicly associated with white nationalist views, whom West had reportedly brought along as a guest at a private dinner with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago just days earlier. During the 3-hour appearance, West repeatedly made comments expressing admiration for Adolf Hitler, at one point stating that every human being brings some kind of value into the world, and specifically including Hitler in that statement, and later saying outright that he liked Hitler and considered himself a Nazi. At one point during the conversation, Jones attempted to give West an opening to step back from these statements, telling him directly that he was not Hitler, was not a Nazi, and did not deserve to be labeled that way. Rather than accepting that opening, West responded by doubling down, insisting there were things about Hitler that he specifically admired. This moment stood out to many people watching the interview at the time, since it came from a host who himself had built a career around promoting conspiracy theories, yet still seemed visibly caught off guard by how far West was willing to take his statements even after being handed a clear chance to walk them back. The reaction to the interview was immediate and came from a wide range of directions. Government officials, including the Israeli ambassador to the United States, issued formal statements condemning the remarks as dangerous incitement capable of encouraging real-world violence. Numerous celebrities and public commentators spoke out against West across social media platforms in the the hours following the broadcast, and the interview quickly became one of the most discussed news stories of that entire week, with search interest and social media activity spiking sharply during and immediately after the live stream. Looking back at this entire stretch of West's public life, from the 2016 hospitalization through the 2022 InfoWars appearance, a clear pattern of escalation emerges. What began as a private health struggle disclosed years after the fact eventually became tangled together with increasingly public political statements, a fashion show built around a recognized hate slogan, a direct threat posted to millions of followers, and finally, remarks praising one of history's most widely condemned figures delivered on a program known for promoting misinformation. Along the way, West lost most of the business partnerships that had built his reported fortune, along with his talent representation and his place among the world's wealthiest people, consequences that came directly and quickly in response to his public statements, rather than unfolding slowly over years. This made West's public image by late 2022 almost unrecognizable compared to the version of him South Park had mocked back in 2009 for simply misunderstanding a joke about fish sticks. That earlier joke had worked because it played on a specific and relatively harmless character flaw, an inflated sense of self-importance that made West unable to laugh at a silly pun about his own name. The version of West making headlines in late 2022 presented an entirely different kind of challenge for anyone hoping to make comedy out of his public behavior. Poking fun at an oversized ego is a well-worn comedic tradition that rarely causes real harm. Poking fun at statements praising a figure responsible for genocide carries a completely different kind of risk, one where a joke told poorly or picked up by the wrong audience could end up spreading the very ideas it was trying to criticize rather than undercutting them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. South Park had already proven years earlier that it was willing to build entire episodes around Kanye West's public behavior, going back to the fish sticks joke that had defined so much of his early reputation as a difficult celebrity to work with. With West's public life having shifted so dramatically by the end of 2022, the show's writers faced a genuinely different kind of decision heading into their next season. The easy, lighthearted mockery of an oversized ego no longer matched the reality of what West had actually said and done in the months leading up to that point, and any new material involving him would need to find a way to address something far more serious than a misunderstood pun about fish sticks. Section 8, Cupid Ye, February 8th, 2023. South Park's return to Kanye West-related material came nearly 14 years after Fish Sticks first aired, arriving in a form that looked almost nothing like the earlier episode. The new episode, titled Cupid Ye, served as the premiere of the show's 26th season, airing on Comedy Central on February 8th, 2023. According to Wikipedia's episode records, it stands as the 320th episode of the series overall. The episode was both written and directed by series co-creator Matt Stone, a slight departure from the more common pattern of Trey Parker handling directing duties on most episodes throughout the show's history. The plot of Cupid Ye begins in a place that has nothing to do with Kanye West at all. Stan Marsh, Kenny McCormick, and Eric Cartman notice that their classmate Kyle Broflovsky has been spending a growing amount of time with another student named Tolkien Black, with the two of them posting videos together on the social media platform TikTok that have become popular among their classmates. Stan feels increasingly left out and jealous watching this new friendship develop, a feeling that does not go unnoticed by Cartman. Rather than offering any real comfort, Cartman frames his response to the situation as an attempt to act like a good, helpful Christian, deciding on his own to do something about the growing distance between Stan and Kyle. The something Cartman decides on turns out to be spreading a harmful and false idea rather than repairing any actual friendship. He begins telling Tolkien and other classmates that Jewish people, including Kyle specifically, secretly control the entertainment industry, invoking a real-world anti-Semitic conspiracy theory associated with a group known as the Black Hebrew Israelites. Cartman takes this a step further by claiming that Kyle personally runs Hollywood, a rumor that spreads through the school with surprising speed. Once the idea takes hold among Cartman's classmates, other students start approaching Kyle directly with movie pitches and headshots, treating him as though he actually holds some kind of hidden authority over the entire entertainment business simply because of a baseless rumor about his religion. Driving much of Cartman's behavior throughout the episode is an imaginary character introduced earlier in the show's history called Cupid Me, a small cherub-like version of Cartman himself who had appeared in a previous episode centered on questions of love and relationships. In Cupid Ye, this same imaginary character reappears, but with a significant transformation. He has adopted a hip-hop influenced style of clothing, taken on openly anti-Semitic beliefs, and changed his own name from Cupid Me to Cupid Ye, a direct reference to Kanye West's real legal name change to Ye 2 years earlier. Rather than appearing as a direct parody of West's physical likeness the way the character had in Fish Sticks, this version of the joke works through implication, with Cartman's imaginary friend embodying a version of West's real-world beliefs and behavior from 2022 without ever showing West himself on screen as a character. The episode includes one especially pointed sequence that draws a direct line back to West's actual public appearances from the months before the episode aired. A fictional talk show segment introduces a guest described as a world-famous rapper and artist who claims that Jewish people run Hollywood, presenting this guest with his face completely obscured. The visual setup of this scene closely mirrors West's real appearance on InfoWars in December of 2022, right down to details of his disguised outfit and the talk show style set closely resembling the visual look of Alex Jones's actual program. Rather than naming West directly or bringing an actual West character into the episode, South Park chose to route the reference entirely through Cartman and his imaginary friend, letting viewers familiar with West's real interview make the connection themselves. As the episode continues, the false rumor about Kyle running Hollywood spreads further through the school, eventually reaching the parents of South Park as well. Randy Marsh, Stan's father, appears in the episode expressing his own frustration about entertainment he considers overly focused on social messaging, adding an adult layer to the same underlying tension driving the children's storyline. Meanwhile, Cupid Ye's influence over Cartman grows more destructive, eventually leading to a scene in which the character vandalizes and steals a car during what the show frames as a joyride. Witnessing this escalation appears to finally shake Cartman into recognizing how far things have gone, leading him to confess his role in starting the entire rumor to Stan. With his role in the situation revealed, Stan apologizes directly to Tolkien, acknowledging that his own jealousy over losing time with Kyle helped set the entire chain of events into motion in the first place. Cartman, for his part, ultimately restrains Cupid Ye and forces him to take medication, a moment that causes the character to revert back into his original form as the gentler Cupid Me. This reversal also appears to lift the anti-Semitic rumor's grip over the rest of the school students, resolving the episode's central conflict. Kyle and Tolkien's friendship is restored by the episode's end, and the false claim that started the entire plot fades away along with Cupid Ye himself. Comparing this episode directly against Fish Sticks reveals just how differently South Park chose to handle West the second time around. In 2009, the show built its entire episode around a fictional version of West appearing on screen as a fully realized character, someone audiences watched directly, listened to, and laughed at as he failed to understand a simple joke about his own name. The humor in that earlier episode worked because it invited the audience to laugh alongside the joke, rather than at anything genuinely harmful, since being mistaken for a gay fish carries no real-world danger or history behind it. Cupid Ye takes an entirely different approach. West himself never appears as a visible character anywhere in the episode. Instead, the show routes its commentary about him through Cartman, a character the show has spent over 2 decades establishing as someone whose worst instincts around bigotry and cruelty already existed long before this specific episode, making him a natural stand-in for exploring how a harmful idea spreads through a community rather than a direct parody of West's likeness or voice. This structural choice reflects a genuine difficulty that Fish Sticks never had to deal with. A joke about someone misunderstanding wordplay involving fish sticks carries essentially no risk of being mistaken for something other than harmless comedy. A storyline touching on real anti-Semitic conspiracy theories carries a very different kind of risk, since repeating those ideas, even in a mocking or critical context, still exposes an audience to the language and logic those ideas rely on. By keeping the anti-Semitic content focused on Cartman's manipulation of his own classmates, rather than staging it as an extended series of jokes about West-specific comments, the episode kept its focus on showing how quickly a baseless rumor can spread through a community and take on a life of its own, a theme South Park has returned to many times across its history, using many different subjects. Rather than building an episode purely around imitating West's exact words and appearance for comedic effect, the critical reception to Cupid Ye when it aired was mixed, reflecting some of the same tension found in how differently this episode approached its subject compared to Fish Sticks. On IMDb, the episode holds a rating of 7.3 out of 10 based on user reviews, a solid but not exceptional score by the standards of the show's most acclaimed episodes. Some reviewers who watched the episode found real value value in how directly it addressed West's real-world statements, praising the show for tackling the subject rather than avoiding it, while other viewers found the episode's central storyline about Kyle and Tolkien's sudden friendship to feel disconnected from where the show had left these characters in earlier seasons, making some of the emotional stakes around Stan's jealousy feel less earned than similar storylines the show had built up more carefully in the past. A recap from the entertainment outlet Consequence described the episode as returning the show to a more basic, school-focused storyline centered on the kids themselves, situating the Kanye-related material as one layer within a broader plot about friendship and jealousy, rather than the entire focus of the episode the way Fish Sticks had been built. Despite the more mixed overall reaction to the episode as a complete piece of television, the specific choice to fold West's real-world statements into an existing storyline about Cartman's history of prejudice, rather than building a new caricature of West from scratch the way the show had done in 2009, marked a clear shift in strategy from South Park's creators. Where Fish Sticks had used West as the butt of a lighthearted joke about ego that he could plausibly laugh along with, and largely did in his own public response at the time, Cupid Ye used West's real statements as raw material to explore a much heavier subject, one where the show's usual instinct toward exaggerated, absurd comedy had to share space with material drawn directly from genuinely alarming real-world events. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Looking at Fish Sticks and Cupid Ye side by side, separated by nearly a decade and a half, offers a clear picture of how much distance West's public life had traveled during that stretch of time. The 2009 episode could poke fun at him without much risk because the target was narrow and harmless, an inflated ego reacting badly to a joke about fish sticks. The 2023 episode had to grapple with a subject that came with real-world consequences already attached to it, choosing to filter its commentary through an established fictional character's flaws rather than restaging West's actual words for laughs. Both episodes came from the same writing team working within the same show, yet the space between them says as much about how West's own choices had changed over those years as it does about anything South Park's creators decided on their own. Section 9. This isn't funny anymore. Fish Sticks and Cupid Ye were not the only time South Park brought Kanye West into an episode or project. Between those two headline-making appearances, the show returned to him on at least 2 additional occasions, each one showing a slightly different side of how the writers chose to handle a real celebrity who kept generating fresh material simply by living his life in public. Looking at these smaller, less discussed appearances alongside the 2 major episodes helps show a fuller picture of how the joke evolved and eventually strained over the better part of 15 years. The first of these additional appearances came in December of 2013 in an episode called The Hobbit, which served as the season finale for the show's 17th season. The episode aired on Comedy Central on December 11th, 2013, and stands as the 247th episode of the series overall, directed and written by Trey Parker. The main plot of the episode centers on Wendy Testerberger, one of the show's recurring characters, and her growing frustration with how photo editing software gets used to make celebrities and models look unrealistically perfect in magazines and advertising. Wendy tries to make a point about this by editing a photo of a classmate to look more conventionally attractive, hoping to demonstrate how easily images can be manipulated. But the demonstration backfires badly when her classmates become convinced the edited photo represents how the girl actually looks in real life. Running alongside this main storyline is a smaller subplot involving Kanye West, who appears in the episode trying to convince the world that his real-life fiancée at the time, Kim Kardashian, does not resemble a hobbit, the small, large-footed creatures from fantasy fiction. The joke of the episode comes from how badly West's attempts to defend Kardashian keep backfiring, since every argument he makes ends up drawing more attention to physical similarities between her and the fantasy creature, rather than putting the comparison to rest. At one point, the episode shows West storming onto the stage of a real-world award ceremony honoring Pope Francis, interrupting the event entirely to keep pressing his point, a moment clearly built as a direct callback to West's real-life interruption of Taylor Swift at the VMAs 4 years earlier. West's attempts to defend Kardashian continue through the episode, including through a parody music video, with each attempt only making the comparison stick more firmly in the minds of the other characters. Critical reaction to The Hobbit was largely positive when it came to Wendy's main storyline, which reviewers frequently praised as one of the character's strongest showcases in the show's history. The reviewer for IGN gave the episode a score of 8.7 out of 10, specifically highlighting the writing behind Wendy's arc as one of the season's best character moments. Reaction to the the Kanye West subplot specifically was more mixed. Some reviewers enjoyed the joke as an entertaining diversion from the episode's heavier main plot, while others found the repeated Hobbit comparison to wear thin well before the episode's end, describing it as a one-note gag that leaned on repetition rather than actually building toward anything new. This reaction pointed to an early sign of a challenge the show's writers would eventually have to reckon with more directly, since a joke that worked well the first time it appeared does not always hold up as well when it gets reused as a recurring bit years later. The second notable appearance came in 2017 through a very different kind of project entirely. That year, South Park's creators worked with the video game publisher Ubisoft to release South Park: The Fractured But Whole, a role-playing video game built around the same characters and setting as the television show. As part of the promotional lead-up to the game's release, the developers put out a trailer built specifically around mocking West, this time targeting a real video game project West had publicly announced back in 2015 called Only One, in which players would have guided West's late mother toward heaven. West's mother, Donda West, had passed away in 2007 following complications from a surgical procedure, and his video game concept, which was never actually released, was based around a tribute to her memory. The trailer for The Fractured But Whole reintroduced the gay fish version of West originally created for Fish Sticks back in 2009, showing him within the game's story asking for help getting his own mother into heaven, closely mirroring the premise of West's real unreleased game concept. The sequence portrayed West's mother as another fish character, shown riding a unicorn through a side-scrolling obstacle course inspired by simple mobile games. This trailer generated a noticeably different kind of reaction compared to earlier Kanye-related material from the show. While some viewers found the sequence funny in the same absurd, exaggerated style the show had always leaned on, others criticized the specific way West's mother was depicted, pointing to details in her appearance and manner of speaking that some viewers felt leaned on tired and offensive stereotypes rather than functioning as simple parody. This criticism marked one of the more openly contested reactions the show had received for any Kanye-related material up to that point, standing in contrast to the largely positive and good-natured response Fish Sticks had received back in 2009. Looking at all four of these appearances together, spanning from 2009 through 2023, a clear shape emerges in how South Park's approach to West changed over time, even before considering the much heavier turn the material took by the time of Cupid Ye. Fish Sticks in 2009 introduced a simple, exaggerated joke about ego that worked well enough that West himself responded to it with humor and self-reflection. The Hobbit in 2013 reused the same basic formula, an exaggerated version of West reacting badly to a silly premise. But reviewers noted the joke felt less fresh the second time around, relying more on repetition of an established bit than on any new insight into West's character. The Fractured But Whole trailer in 2017 pushed the reused gay fish character into new territory, involving West's deceased mother, a choice that drew real criticism over how the joke was executed rather than simply whether it was funny. By the time West's real-world behavior escalated dramatically in 2022, culminating in his appearance on InfoWars praising Hitler, South Park's writers were working with a very different set of constraints than they had back in 2009. A joke about being a gay fish carries no real-world weight and cannot meaningfully spread harm if repeated or taken out of context. A joke built around anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, even one clearly framed as criticism, carries a genuine risk of repeating harmful ideas to an audience regardless of the intended tone, which is part of why Cupid Ye chose to route its commentary through Cartman's established pattern of prejudice rather than building a direct caricature of West saying similar things on screen. The show's writers had spent years testing how far a recurring joke about the same celebrity could stretch before it started feeling repetitive, or eventually, before the subject matter itself became too serious to handle with the same lighthearted tools that had worked so well back in 2009. This progression says as much about the limits of celebrity-based satire in general as it does about West specifically. A joke aimed at an oversized ego can be reused several times before audiences grow tired of it, as The Hobbit's mixed reception in 2013 demonstrated. A joke aimed at a specific painful subject, like the death of someone's mother, risks crossing into territory that damages the joke's own reception, as some of the response to the 2017 game trailer showed. And a joke built around real documented statements involving hatred toward an entire group of people requires an entirely different kind of care, one that led South Park's writers to abandon their usual direct impersonation approach altogether by the time Cupid Ye finally addressed West's actual 2022 statements. Across all four of these moments, the show's writers were essentially running an ongoing experiment in how much real-world unfurled weight a piece of satire can carry before the comedy itself has to change shape entirely to keep functioning. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. South Park's 14-year relationship with Kanye West as recurring subject matter closed out, at least for now, with Cupid Ye standing as a much heavier and more careful piece of writing than anything that came before it in this specific thread of the show's history. What began as a lighthearted joke about a misunderstood pun had, by 2023, required the show's writers to build an entire layer of narrative distance between their commentary and their actual subject, filtering real-world hatred through the lens of a fictional character's established flaws, rather than putting West himself back on screen the way they had done 3 separate times in the years before. Whether South Park chooses to revisit West again in future seasons remains an open question, one that depends entirely on what direction his own public life takes from here, a direction that has proven, across more than 2 decades of public life, to be almost impossible to predict with any real confidence. Section 10. 2 careers, 1 recurring joke. By the middle of 2026, South Park and Kanye West had spent 17 years occasionally crossing paths, starting with a simple joke about fish sticks and ending up somewhere neither the show's writers nor West himself could have predicted back in 2009. Looking at where both of these long-running stories stood by this point offers a clear picture of just how differently 2 creative careers can unfold. Even when they started from oddly similar positions of being underestimated outsiders, fighting their way into industries that did not initially want them. South Park's path through these years has been one of remarkable stability, at least by the standards of American television. The show has continued airing new seasons well past the point most television series ever reach, becoming widely recognized as cable's longest-running scripted series. In 2021, Trey Parker and Matt Stone signed a deal worth $900 million with the media company behind Comedy Central, extending the show's run through 2027 and including plans for over a dozen additional feature-length specials to stream alongside the regular series. That deal was followed by an even larger arrangement in July of 2025 when Parker and Stone agreed to a new 5-year deal worth $1.5 billion, moving the show's streaming rights to Paramount Plus and committing to produce 50 additional episodes at a pace of 10 new episodes each year. Season 27 premiered under this new arrangement on July 23, 2025, followed by Season 28 later that same year, continuing a storyline that carried directly over between the 2 seasons. Season 27 itself continued the show's long-standing tradition of building entire seasons around whichever public figures and events were dominating the news at the time, this time centering heavily on a caricature of Donald Trump that appeared throughout every episode of the season. Parker and Stone had actually delayed the season's original planned release, specifically to avoid airing new episodes during the height of the 2024 presidential election, telling interviewers they felt they had already covered so many past elections that they were not sure what new commentary they could offer on this one while it was actively unfolding. Once the season did arrive the following year, it leaned into exactly the kind of sharp, fast turnaround political satire the show had built its modern reputation on, continuing a creative pattern that had remained largely consistent since the show's earliest seasons back in the late 1990s. Kanye West's path through this same stretch of time looked almost nothing like this kind of stability. Rather than settling into a predictable pattern following the intense controversies of late 2022, West's public life continued generating fresh headlines through 2025 and into 2026, many of them connected directly back to the same subject matter that had cost him his business partnerships and his billionaire status years earlier. In May of 2025, West released a song titled Heil Hitler, a title referencing a phrase closely associated with Nazi Germany, drawing renewed and immediate condemnation from governments, advocacy groups, and members of the public across multiple countries. South Korea reportedly cut off business and distribution ties connected to West following this release, while officials in cities including Prague publicly condemned the song and effectively closed off future performance opportunities in their region. The consequences of this continued pattern followed West into 2026 in ways that echoed the business fallout he had already experienced back in 2022. In March of that year, organizers of the United Kingdom's Wireless Festival announced West as the headlining performer for all 3 nights of the event, marking what would have been his first UK performances in over a decade. The announcement immediately drew criticism from a wide range of voices, including the country's own prime minister, who publicly stated his concern over booking a performer with West's history of anti-Semitic remarks and public statements celebrating Nazism. Major festival sponsors, investors, including a well-known soft drink company and a large beverage corporation, withdrew their financial backing from the event within days of the announcement. By early April, the British government had formally withdrawn West's travel authorization, blocking his entry into the country entirely, and forcing organizers to cancel the festival outright, with all ticket holders receiving refunds. Around this same period, West took out a full-page advertisement in a major American newspaper, publishing a written apology addressing his past behavior. In the letter, he expressed regret over actions he described as occurring during periods of poor judgment, directly referencing his bipolar disorder diagnosis as part of the explanation for his past conduct, while also stating plainly that he did not consider himself a Nazi or someone who holds hatred toward Jewish people. Despite this public apology, reporting from early 2026 indicated that organizers of the Grammy Awards had decided against inviting West to that year's ceremony, with sources close to the situation suggesting the door had effectively closed on his attendance, regardless of any public statements he made going forward. Even amid this ongoing controversy, West continued working and performing throughout this period, showing that his career, while badly damaged in terms of business partnerships and public reputation, had not come to a complete stop. He was scheduled to headline a large outdoor concert in Italy in July of 2026 at a venue capable of holding over 100,000 people, marking his first European performance since 2014. Reports also indicated plans for West's first ever performances in India that same year, alongside continued work on a long-delayed studio album that had already missed multiple previously announced release dates. This pattern of business partnerships collapsing over public controversy, while West nonetheless continued to find audiences and venues willing to host him somewhere in the world, had become a defining feature of his career by this point, repeating itself across multiple countries and multiple controversies spanning several years. Placing these two paths side by side highlights just how differently two creative enterprises can age over the same stretch of time. South Park's stability comes largely from a formula its creators refined over decades, reacting quickly to whatever dominates the news cycle each week, while maintaining enough creative and financial security through long-term deals that the show rarely faces existential risk regardless of which celebrities or events it chooses to satirize in any given episode. West's career, by contrast, has been shaped by a much more volatile relationship between his own public statements and the business world's willingness to continue supporting him, a relationship that has repeatedly broken down and then partially rebuilt itself in different countries and different industries as the years have passed. The fish sticks joke that first connected these two names back in 2009 could not have predicted either of these outcomes. At the time, it worked as a simple, low-stakes joke about a celebrity too proud to laugh at himself, the kind of gentle mockery South Park had built its reputation on delivering to dozens of public figures across its history without any of them losing business partnerships or facing government travel bans as a result. What happened to West's public life in the years that followed had nothing to do with that joke itself, and everything to do with choices West made entirely on his own. Choices that eventually required South Park's own writers to abandon the lighthearted comedic approach that had worked so well the first time around, replacing it with something far more careful and indirect once the subject matter turned toward genuine hatred rather than harmless ego. 17 years after Jimmy Valmer first stumbled into a joke about a freezer full of fish sticks, the question that opened this entire story still carries a strange kind of weight. Asking whether someone likes fish sticks was never really about seafood at all. It was about whether a person could take a joke, laugh along, and move on with their life unchanged. One cartoon character eventually did exactly that, accepting the joke and swimming off into a fictional ocean by the end of his episode. The real person behind that character took a much longer, much harder road to figure out the same lesson. And as of the middle of 2026, it remains genuinely unclear whether he ever fully will. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.